In this video, we're going to cover 3 ways to improve yourself as a leader in your nonprofit organization. Let's do it.
Hi, we are Ted and Lisa Snyder, and we are nonprofit consultants because we believe a better world needs healthier nonprofits. Now, healthier nonprofit often starts with healthier leadership, and one way to get healthier is simply to do little things that are going to help improve yourself. A lot of times it's not that leadership in nonprofit is trying to be unhealthy. We read a lot of articles, we follow a lot of stories, we read a lot of Reddit posts. And sometimes there's this idea of like the leader is just this way and they're happy to be that way. But often it's that leaders have blind spots just like other people. And this can be a leader at the top of an organization or in the middle of an organization. And it's super important that we as leaders are constantly trying to improve ourselves and setting ourselves up to not just grow our strengths, but also to become aware of those spots that sometimes we just don't notice, so that as we are doing better for the world, we are also doing better for the people that we're leading.
So the first tip to improve yourself as a leader in your nonprofit is to find a mentor or maybe get a new mentor.
Mentorship is something that we highly, highly value. And there are a couple key things that you want to look for when you're looking for mentorship. So this is why we say you might need to get a new one. Because there need to be 2 facets. There need to be multiple facets, but these are 2 that I think are missed a lot. One, they have a life that you want, not just the skills that you want. There are people who have skills that I want, and then I dig in a little bit and I look at their lives, and their lives are either chaotic, or maybe they're working just all the time, or their personal lives are falling apart, or there's, they might be getting the results, but they're just treating people terribly. And I look at it, it's like, you're offering me mentorship, but if I want your results, I also have to take everything else that comes along with your practices. And I don't just want your skills, I also need to want your life, and I do not want that for myself. So make sure that they have a life overall that you're like, yes, if I follow in your footsteps and I go where you're going and I end up like that, I'm going to be happy. That's really important.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, you'll hear people say like, well, just kind of take like bits and pieces of what's worked for certain people or what hasn't worked for certain people. People will study somebody's life like Steve Jobs, they'll study like famous CEOs or people who have been really successful. And when you dig into their life, you realize this person works 80 hours a week. Is that actually what I want? Some people do want that. Some people like, hey, that's a fulfilled life for me. I can spend the amount of time I want to spend with my kids, or I don't even like really care to have a family. So that's where I want to invest my time in my life. And you have to think about the fact that when you do their practices, when you do the things that they say to do, they're probably only going to be as effective as the investment that they've put in those things. So if they have spent 15 years of working 80 hours a week, and they say, hey, one of the main things that you need to do as a leader is X, you have to remember that they probably did that thing 80 hours a week for 15 years to get their results.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, oh, I just do the 3 things that they're saying. I have to also take along with their advice the consequences, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah. And this can also be things like maybe you have someone who they're like, I just hired a bunch of people and I don't really keep a calendar and I just kind of day to day work on whatever I'm passionate about. If that's not what works for your natural wiring, like how you operate in the world, what you need to thrive, even though they might have the results, the practices that they're following might be something that absolutely just destroys you. And you don't even realize that that's a possibility until you start looking and you're like, I love your results, but the way that you're doing it would make me feel like I'm going, it would feel too chaotic. Like, and I need a little bit more stability than the way that you operate and work. And that's okay. But you need to know that it's not just the end results. It's not just the skills. It's also life. And I think a huge one is just simply how people talk to other people. There are some leaders that have a great lifestyle. They work a reasonable number of hours. They have great results. And behind the scenes, they're just mean. Just mean. Like, that's the way to explain them. And you don't necessarily see it from the outside, but you need to look at it and say, all of those other things partly came because of how they treat people. is that the way that I want to treat people? Because if I'm trying to pull off everything else that they're doing, but I'm going to be kind, it's likely not going to be, I don't want to say as effective because, I'm not encouraging meanness, but it is something that you need to recognize. You can't just pull out these things that we think are just, oh, they're little extras. The way that you talk to people is like a sprinkle on top. No, it's foundational. It's like the flower. The language that you use and the way that you show care, highly important, or the way that you don't show care, highly important to how other things grow and how they work. And so we need to be careful with that.
Yeah, finding a mentor is a process that takes time. You don't want to just grab the first mentor that you see and ask them to be a mentor, or first person you see, and say, hey, help me get better at leadership. You want to make sure that they have the ability to help you improve, but also in taking their advice, you're going to end up in a good place.
Yeah.
Now, secondarily, with finding a mentor, you want someone who's going to be honest with you and call you out. We've seen time and time again leaders in especially nonprofit who surround themselves with yes men. They surround themselves with staff members, volunteers, board members that'll basically just kind of go along with whatever they say. And in some sense, you need these people to be united together, but you also need mentorship and people in your lives who are going to say, I'm united with you, I care for you, and I care for your organization, but I'm still going to call you out on your BS.
Yes. And the calling out can look different depending on your personality type. For me, I need someone who's just gonna be like, hey, you're not doing good. Like, this sucks. Let's do better. Like, for someone else, it might be more of a, hey, I'm kind of seeing the side that maybe you're missing this part of this thing, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be a
jerk.
It doesn't have to be straightforward. It doesn't have to be harsh. For me, with a mentor, I need someone who, if I don't follow through on my stuff, I show up and actually feel embarrassed. But a lot of people, if I showed up and they're like, did you do your stuff? And I was like, no. Like, why not? I don't want to. Like, a lot of people I won't feel embarrassed in front of. And so for me, I know I have to have a certain level of investment and other things in place that it's going to drive me to want to do it. But that also means that I need a mentor who is willing to call me out when I'm not doing stuff. Because one of the worst things for me personally is to set a goal, go to someone, say I didn't hit my goal, and have them say, oh, it's okay. Because it doesn't work. We also need people who are willing to not just call us out when we're not taking the right action, but also when we have a blind spot that they see because we don't always see it. When we have a weakness where it's not just like, oh, you're not as good in this area, so try and get better. But it's like a leadership blind spot that could either be hurting people, hurting our organization, is setting us up for long-term pain, whatever it might be. We need a mentor who's going to look at that and say, hey, you know what? You're like, this area is bad. Like, we need to fix this. We need to address it. And who isn't going to let us talk us out of it or justify why we act the way we act or why it's not really that big a deal. But someone who's going to say, no, this is what's important right now. We need to address this. And I'm going to hold your feet to the fire just a little bit because I care more about your long-term success than your short-term comfort. And those two people they can be hard to find, but it's worth the process of not just finding a mentor who will take you on, but finding a mentor that you want to take on. It has to be a two-way street.
So let's talk about mentorship. Leads perfectly into tip number 2 to improve yourself. And we've sort of heard this one probably a ton as leaders, but it is so important not to just hear it and not do it. Tip number 2 is read and or listen and apply.
Yes.
Read or listen and apply. The reason I say read or listen is because I like to read, but recently I listen to more stuff on Audible or whatever, just the way that my life is structured right now.
And it's something that we know is really important. And this is something where I think mentorship comes in really, really big because there are so many books that you could read. There are so many things you could listen to. But knowing where those kind of gems are, that you can read the right thing for what you need. If you're struggling in an area and you read a book that's like, that area is not important, that's not going to help. So we want to make sure that we're reading and listening to the right stuff. And not just for Not just things that you think other people need to learn. I've seen leaders read books because they feel like their staff isn't working at the level that they should be working at. So they find a book that then they can read, and then they can go to their staff and be like, here's this book backs up how I feel. You need to change X, Y, and Z. And so it has to be books that we as leaders are reading for our own personal growth. Now, this is one thing that we heard a lot with when we're talking to people in ministry, because there is this tendency where people will be like, all right, I'm doing like church work, I'm going to read the Bible, and they're reading it and they're going, okay, this is valuable for this volunteer, and this is valuable for this staff member, and this is valuable for this person over here. And there comes a point in time where you have to say, stop. If you are going to succeed in this long term, you also have to read it for yourself, not to
Right.
just be able to tell other people about, but for your own changing, for your own growth. And it's the same with other types of books as well. It can't just be, I'm reading this so I can tell you, volunteer, that I think you're wrong, and this author backs me up. And it can't even be, I'm reading this for myself, but the whole time I'm thinking about how I'm going to explain this to this other staff member volunteer. There are times that we just have to read it for ourselves and just keep it for ourselves as we process it and as we work through what we've learned in order for us to be able to grow too.
So a couple of recommendations of books that we have really loved for leadership over the last few years that we have read are Emotional Intelligence 2.0, The One Thing by Gary Keller.
Yeah, Leading with a Limp. I don't remember the author. I will include it in the notes below. But that's one that I've read that you're still reading. It's just very interesting. It's not leading while you're hurt, but it's leading recognizing that we're all kind of not perfect in leadership and how to handle that. What are a couple other ones?
The 5 Levels of Leadership by
Yep.
John Maxwell is really, really good. There are a ton of great books out there, but the big thing to remember is just do a little bit of vetting on the author. Make sure that they're a practitioner. Make sure that there's somebody who's actually kind of been in the field doing some of the stuff, and that they have a decent track record. I mean, there's always going to be people that say, oh, this author sucks for whatever reason. You got to kind of balance that out and make sure that, again, you're wanting the life or a life that's similar to the life that the author of that book has built. They're basically a short-term mentor for you during the process of you reading and applying that book. So just vet that as you go.
Yep. And then number 3, invest. Set aside time and budget for all of this. We hear a lot from people, I just don't have the time to read. I don't have the time to listen. I don't have the money to spend on that. The money that you'll spend reading the right stuff, meeting with the right people, it's so valuable. It's so important, but it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. I think there's a huge thing that's like, it doesn't have to cost money. It can be free. But we also need to recognize that there's something mentally different that happens when we do spend money on it. When we are willing to invest money in something, it changes how we take in that material. Because when I buy a book when I rent a book from the library versus when I buy one from someone, I read them differently. One of them is I'll read it a little bit and I can return it and I can always get it again. I may or may not finish. But there's something about purchasing something or putting money into something or taking a course or paying for time with a mentor versus sitting down and going out for coffee. Like, there's something different about the investment that makes me say, I'm going to get my money's worth out of this. I'm going to get my time worth out of this. I am going to take everything that I can from this and implement as much as possible. Something changes when we actually recognize that we need to put in an investment. And if you don't see the time with a mentor as an investment because you're not paying them, recognize how much of an investment your time is. Your time is so incredibly valuable, and we need to prioritize what we're being taught and actually utilizing it.
So set aside time and finances in your organizational budget and your personal budget to invest in yourself when it comes to going to conferences, when it comes to taking courses, reading books, meeting with mentors. Some mentors and coaches, they cost money, right? Making sure that you're having counseling in your life so that you can improve as a person, improve as a leader in your organization.
Yeah. And recognize that Just because you found a mentor, if you're not investing the time into doing what they're suggesting, they might not stay your mentor, even if you're paying them.
It's true.
There are some mentors that even if you pay them, it's not worth it for them unless you're actually going to take action. I remember there were times that I'd have different people. I wasn't charging for them at that point in time, but we would meet for regular things. And if we met once and I gave them some feedback, and the next time we met, they came to me with the same issue and hadn't taken action, I wouldn't meet with them going forward.
Mhm.
I was like, you can't pay me enough to sit down with you every month to have me watch you not do anything and not change your life and not help your organization and not grow, because that's more painful than any
Yeah.
amount of money. And so recognize that if you're going to do the work of finding the mentor and they give you stuff to read and listen to, set aside the time and the budget, not just for that initial conversation, but then to also do what they're asking you to do, because highly important.
So great leaders know how to treat the people in their organization. And as you become a better leader, you're going to treat people in a way that makes them excited to be a part of what your organization is doing. However, sometimes great leaders and bad leaders make mistakes. And we have a video that either you'll find entertaining or maybe point out a couple of blind spots that you have in your organization, called Ways Not Nonprofit Leaders Treat Their Volunteers Like Kindergartners. That we had a lot of fun putting together, but it's also just a really good like light bulb moment for people who are in leadership positions in nonprofits. Go ahead and check that video out, and we'll see you there.